Let me get this straight. Because everyone in my life seems to have gotten the story completely backward. They whisper in corners, their sympathetic glances feeling more like accusations. They think I'm the problem, that I'm the architect of my own loneliness. Honestly, it's complete garbage. My name is Alara. I'm 29, and apparently, I'm some kind of heartless monster for wanting to be absolutely, unequivocally sure about the single biggest decision of a woman's life. For 4 years, Silas was my world. Or, more accurately, I was the sun around which his world orbited. He was a good man, no one could deny that. He was steady, which I suppose is a nice word for predictable. He worked in logistics, something to do with shipping containers and timetables, a job as stable and unexciting as he was. I work in office administration, a world of organized files and color-coded schedules. We made sense. On paper, we were perfect. But love isn't a spreadsheet. I loved him. Yes. I loved the way he'd bring me coffee in the morning exactly how I liked it, without me having to ask. I loved the solid, comforting weight of his arm around me at night. But was that enough to build a forever on? The world is full of so much more than comfortable silences and perfectly made coffee. The thing about Silas was his crippling inability to make a decision without my seal of approval. "What do you want for dinner, Alara?" he'd ask. Every single night, his eyes wide with a desperate need to please. At first I found it thoughtful. It felt like he was putting my happiness first. But after 4 years, it felt less like thoughtfulness and more like a void of opinion. Sometimes, I just wanted him to take charge. To say, "Tonight, we're having Italian. I've made a reservation." But he never did. It was always, "Whatever makes you happy, Alara." It applied to everything where we went on vacation, what movie we watched, which friends we saw on the weekend. My happiness became his sole objective, and while that might sound like a dream to some, it was utterly exhausting. It was like I was dating a handsome, loving echo of myself. It's ironic, because throughout our relationship, I was the one who always seemed to need more reassurance. I'd poke and prod, asking if he was truly happy, if he saw a future with us, if he was sure. He'd always answer with a resounding, unwavering, "Yes." But when he'd gently try to turn the questions back on me, a defensive wall would shoot up. Why did he need to dissect my feelings? Couldn't he just trust that I was with him because I chose to be? My commitment shouldn't require constant verbal validation. To be fair, I've always been someone who needs to feel secure. I don't leap. I perform a thorough risk assessment before taking a single step. And to that end, I'll admit I conducted what I called reality checks throughout our relationship. They were small, harmless situations I'd create just to gauge his commitment, to see if he was as all in as he claimed. For instance, I might mention a new male colleague who was particularly complimentary, just to see if a flicker of protective jealousy would cross his face. I needed to know he'd fight for me, or I'd pull back emotionally for a day or two, becoming a little distant, just to see if he'd notice and double his efforts to bring me closer. He always did. He'd come running back with flowers, or plan a surprise date night, his brow furrowed with concern. Each time he passed one of these little tests, it was like a deposit into my bank of security. It proved he cared, even if it clearly stressed him out. I saw it as a necessary form of stress testing the foundation of our relationship. I kept mental notes of everything. The time it took him to text back. The instances he made plans with his friends before checking my schedule. It wasn't a crazy, obsessive thing, it was just observation. I'm an observant person. When I'd bring these patterns up, he'd often dismiss them, telling me I was overthinking or being too sensitive. But I wasn't being sensitive. I was being vigilant. There's a difference. To our friends, we were the gold standard. The couple everyone looked up to. I worked hard to maintain that facade, because the last thing I needed was everyone's opinion on the inner workings of my relationship. But behind closed doors, the little things about him grated on me. He wasn't ambitious enough. He was content with his mid-level logistics job, whereas I dreamed of something more, of a partner who pushed boundaries and aimed for the stars. He was also socially awkward at times. In group settings, I'd often have to steer the conversation or cover for a joke that didn't land. It wasn't that he was a bad person. He just wasn't as polished as I felt I deserved. The other women in our friend group would gush about how lucky I was. "Silas is such a catch," they'd say. "He adores you." It got on my nerves because they only saw the surface. They didn't see the man who left wet towels on the bed, or who was completely oblivious to the subtle hints I'd drop about a piece of jewelry I liked. But I'd just smile and play the part of the happy, devoted girlfriend. It was easier that way. By year 3, the pressure started to mount. Silas began talking about marriage more openly, mentioning kids, and sending me links to houses in the suburbs. Each mention felt less like a shared dream and more like a deadline he was imposing on me. Why did everything have to be on his timeline? Why couldn't we just enjoy what we had without needing a label or a legal document to validate it? I felt suffocated by his expectations, so whenever he'd bring up rings or weddings, I'd deftly change the subject, or give a non-committal hum. I wasn't ready. I needed more time. The first proposal happened on a Tuesday in July. He'd been acting strange all week, jumpy and secretive. I knew something was up, but I played along, curious to see what he had planned. He told me we were going for a drive, and we ended up at the beach, the exact spot where we'd had our first date. As he started reminiscing about that night, getting all sentimental, I knew what was coming. He got down on one knee in the sand, the setting sun casting a golden glow, and pulled out a small velvet box. My first thought wasn't about our love, or our future, or the man kneeling before me. My first thought was, how utterly basic. The beach again. He couldn't have come up with something more original? I'd seen proposal videos on the internet that put this to shame. When he asked me to marry him, his voice thick with emotion, I felt a bizarre cocktail of pressure and irritation. Here he was, putting me on the spot in public, expecting me to dissolve into a puddle of joyous tears like some actress in a rom-com. But that's not me. I don't operate on pure emotion. I operate on logic, and the logic was telling me that this wasn't right. Not yet. So, I told him what felt like the kindest truth in that moment. I want to marry you, I said, choosing my words with surgical precision, but not right now. I watched the light drain from his eyes. His hopeful smile collapsed, replaced by a mask of confusion and hurt. And if I'm being completely honest, a part of me felt a flicker of something else. Power. Seeing how profoundly my answer affected him was a stark reminder of how much he needed me, how central I was to his happiness. It was a terrible thought, I know, but it was there. I quickly followed up with a gentle explanation about not being in the right headspace, about needing more time to feel personally ready. I didn't tell him the real reasons. The first reason was that, at 26, I wasn't entirely convinced he was my best option. The world was still full of possibilities. There was a man at my office, Julian, a senior project manager who was sharp, confident, and radiated an ambition that Silas sorely lacked. I wasn't planning on cheating, of course not, but I wanted to keep that door, and others like it, just slightly ajar. You never know. The second reason was that I wanted Silas to prove himself more. The ring was nice, a simple solitaire, but it wasn't breathtaking. I wanted to see him work harder, climb the ladder at his company, show me he could provide the kind of lifestyle I envisioned. By making him wait, I reasoned, I was giving him the opportunity to step up his game, to truly earn my yes. After all, anything worth having is worth fighting for, and I wanted him to fight for me. The year between the first and second proposal became what I privately referred to as my testing phase. I saw his post-rejection vulnerability not as a wound to be healed, but as an opportunity to recalibrate our relationship to better suit my needs. He was desperate to show me how serious he was, and I was more than willing to give him a roadmap. The expectations were established quickly. If he wanted to prove his commitment, it had to be reflected in his effort. I started expecting more elaborate, expensive dates. Casual weeknight pizza was no longer acceptable. I wanted reservations at places with tasting menus. I wanted more thoughtful gestures, more tangible proof that he was thinking of me. If he was going to marry me, he needed to demonstrate he could provide a life that was more than just comfortable, it had to be exceptional. I also began to push his boundaries more systematically. I'd become intentionally vague about my plans for an evening or let his texts go unanswered for hours, just to see how he'd react. When he'd inevitably ask what was wrong or where I'd been, I'd flip it around, accusing him of being insecure and not trusting me. Jealousy is such an unattractive quality, Silas, I'd say coolly. It really pushes me away. He'd retreat immediately, apologizing for being possessive, and I would feel that satisfying sense of control settle back into place. It wasn't about being cruel, it was about training him. I was teaching him how to love me properly, showing him the parameters within which our relationship could thrive. During this time, my professional friendship with Julian at work blossomed. He was recently divorced and had a worldly confidence that I found intoxicating. We'd grab coffee to discuss work projects, and the conversation would inevitably drift to life, career ambitions, and relationships. He listened to me in a way Silas didn't. He saw my drive, my intelligence. "You're wasted in your current role, Alara," he told me once. "You should be running this place." He made me feel seen for the qualities I valued most in myself, qualities that Silas seemed to take for granted. I never crossed any physical lines with Julian. I wasn't a cheater, but I savored the attention. It was a constant, validating reminder of my market value, of the options I had if I chose to exercise them. It kept Silas on his toes, and it kept my perspective clear. Meanwhile, my expectations for Silas continued to evolve. I wanted him to be a mind reader, to anticipate my needs before I even voiced them. If he failed by forgetting an insignificant anniversary of our third date or buying the wrong brand of almond milk, I'd withdraw emotionally. I'd give him the silent treatment, a cold shoulder that would last until he'd exhaust himself with apologies and grand gestures to make it up to me. I'd vent to my girlfriends, of course, but always in a carefully constructed way. "I love him so much," I'd sigh, "but I just worry we're not on the same page about ambition." Or, "He's the sweetest man, but sometimes he just doesn't get social cues." My friends were wonderfully supportive, agreeing that I deserved someone who could match my energy. I always made sure to pepper the complaints with enough positive anecdotes to keep them from thinking I was just being negative. It was all about balance. As we neared the 1-year mark of his first proposal, I noticed a subtle shift in Silas. He stopped asking my opinion about every little thing. He started making plans with his friends without cross-referencing my calendar first. At first, it annoyed me. It felt like he was pulling away, like my training was failing. But then, a different thought occurred to me. Maybe he was finally developing a backbone. This could be a good sign. It also made me nervous. I was so used to being the gravitational center of his universe. His newfound independence felt threatening. To counteract this, I found myself initiating more affection. I'd plan surprise date nights or be more physically demonstrative. It wasn't because I was feeling a surge of love, but because I needed to ensure he remained invested. I had to keep him on the hook while I continued to figure things out. I wasn't ready to give up the power dynamic we had, where he was constantly working to win me over while I maintained my freedom and my options. So I started dropping hints that I was feeling more ready for the next step, curious to see if he'd take the bait and try again. The second proposal happened at the downtown botanical garden. I knew it was coming. The hints I'd been dropping had been received, and his nervous energy was back, tenfold. This time, he'd clearly put in more effort. Our friends were involved, hiding in the bushes to take pictures. That part annoyed me. Now there was an audience, a group of people who were all invested in me saying yes. He'd set up a scene by the main fountain. There were roses, candles, the whole romantic cliché. It was beautiful, I'll give him that. But it also felt like a beautiful trap, a meticulously designed stage to manipulate my emotions with theatrics. I felt cornered. When he got down on one knee for the second time, holding a new ring that was significantly larger and more impressive than the first, a wave of familiar irritation washed over me. I was impressed by the upgrade, by the sheer effort of it all. But I was also frustrated that he was forcing me into another decision point, another public spectacle. As I stood there, looking down at his hopeful, upturned face, my mind drifted. I thought about Julian. He'd recently mentioned his divorce was final and that he was ready to start dating again. He'd made a comment just last week about how lucky Silas was to have me. What would a life with Julian look like? A life with a partner who was my equal in ambition, who wouldn't need me to constantly guide him. Was I settling by staying with Silas? "Elara," Silas began, his voice shaking slightly, "I've spent the last year trying to be the man you deserve." He went on, but I barely heard the words. My mind was racing, weighing the pros and cons. The comfort and devotion of Silas versus the thrilling, unknown potential of a life with someone like Julian. When he finally asked the question again, "Will you marry me?" I gave him the answer that felt right, the one that would buy me more time. Not just yet, I said softly. I expected disappointment. I did not expect what happened next. His face didn't just fall. It hardened. The hurt from the first rejection was replaced by a cold, quiet anger I had never seen before. Instead of just accepting my answer, he stood up, brushing the dirt from his knee. No, he said, his voice flat. Not again. What is it you're waiting for, Alara? What's the magic sign you need? I was taken aback. This was not part of the script. I just need to be sure, I stammered, falling back on my old excuse. It's forever, Silas. I want it to be perfect. 4 years, he said, his voice rising. We've been together for 4 years. If you're not sure by now, what will ever make you sure? His words stung because they painted me as indecisive, as flaky. Which wasn't true. I was just being careful. That's not fair, I started, but he cut me off. What's not fair is me putting my life on hold, waiting for a yes that might never come. I'm done, Alara. I'm done wasting my time. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through me. The ground wasn't shifting because I was losing him. It was shifting because I was losing my grip. I was about to lose the comfortable dynamic where I held all the cards, where I had someone so completely devoted to me. I couldn't let that happen. My usual tactics kicked in. Tears welled in my eyes, my voice began to tremble. This was the vulnerability that always made him back down, that made him rush to comfort and reassure me. But this time he just stood there, his expression unreadable, watching me cry. He didn't move. He didn't try to fix it. I was losing control of the situation, and that scared me more than anything. In a moment of pure desperation, the words tumbled out of my mouth. Fine. Yes. I'll marry you, okay? Please don't go. Even as I said it, I knew it was wrong. I wasn't saying yes because I wanted to be his wife. I was saying it to win the argument, to regain my power, to make him stay. He looked at me, a deep sadness in his eyes. He shook his head slowly. You don't mean that, he said quietly. You're just saying it so you don't lose. And then he turned and walked away. Our friends, who had started to emerge from their hiding spots, froze in awkward silence. I just stood there, amidst the roses and the candles, completely and utterly shocked. I had never seen him stand so firm. I had no idea how to handle a version of Silas who wouldn't bend to my will. The aftermath was chaos, but not the kind you see in movies. I wasn't a sobbing wreck, devastated by the loss of the love of my life. My first instinct wasn't grief, it was rage. A white-hot, indignant fury that he had dared to take control away from me, to end things on his terms. My second instinct was to assign blame. This couldn't possibly be my fault. Our friends should have talked some sense into him instead of enabling this dramatic ultimatum. His family, who I'd always felt were quietly critical of me, had probably poisoned his mind. Other women must have been whispering in his ear, filling his head with nonsense about what he deserved. I gave him 3 days. I was certain he'd come crawling back, tail between his legs, begging for forgiveness. That was our pattern. We'd fight. I'd get my way, and he would be the one to apologize and make things right. But 3 days turned into a week, then 2. Nothing. The silence from his end was deafening, and it was infuriating. That's when I launched my campaign. I had to control the narrative. I started calling our mutual friends, particularly the women, and weaving carefully curated versions of the truth. I'm just so hurt, I'd say, my voice trembling for effect. I love him so much, but I just needed a little more time to feel secure. Is that so wrong? And he gave me an ultimatum. He basically forced me into a corner. It felt like emotional manipulation. It worked like a charm. Most of my female friends were immediately on my side. They brought me ice cream and wine, validating my feelings, telling me I was strong for standing up for my needs. I painted myself as the victim of his impatience and unrealistic expectations, and they bought it completely. The attention and sympathy were a soothing balm on my wounded pride. I liked being the wounded party, but I was getting frustrated that some people, mostly his close male friends, weren't buying it. They were distant. Their replies to my texts were curt. They clearly thought he had been more than patient. Whatever, they were biased. My anger soon morphed into obsession. I stalked his social media profiles relentlessly, analyzing every post, every like, for a sign that he was miserable without me. There were none. I'd casually ask mutual friends about him, feigning polite concern when all I wanted was information. How's he holding up? I'm just so worried about him. I even found myself driving past his apartment building, or the gym I knew he went to, hoping for a glimpse, a chance to gauge his emotional state. The reports I got back were not what I wanted to hear. He seemed to be fine. More than fine. He was going out with his friends. He was taking a weekend trip he'd always wanted to take. He was posting pictures from a hiking trail, smiling, smiling. Someone told me he seemed happier, lighter. This news made me absolutely furious. How dare he be okay? How dare he thrive in my absence? After 4 years of me being the center of his existence, how could he just move on? I started planting subtle criticisms about him in conversations with our friend group. Nothing overt, just little comments about his communication issues or his emotional immaturity. I needed people to understand that this breakup was a reflection of his shortcomings, not mine. I had to ensure no one saw him as the victim here. He was the one who couldn't handle a strong woman who knew her own mind. That was the story, and I was sticking to it. 6 months after Silas walked away, the universe decided to shatter my carefully constructed narrative in the cruelest way possible. I found out through social media. He wasn't just moving on, he was soaring. A new woman had started appearing in his posts. Her name was Clara. She was a nurse, or something equally, annoyingly wholesome. She had a kind, open face and a smile that looked genuine, not practiced for a camera. I spent hours, whole evenings, scrolling through her profile, then his, analyzing their interactions. There was no drama, no cryptic quotes about relationships, no passive-aggressive jabs. They just seemed to be happy. They went to farmers markets. They adopted a dog. They took a cooking class together. It was disgustingly healthy. The devastating blow came when I learned through the grapevine that Silas had proposed to Clara. They had been together for 8 months, and she had said yes, immediately. 8 months. The words echoed in my head. 8 months. I had 4 years, 48 months, and it wasn't enough. This woman knew after less than a year. The engagement announcement was plastered all over social media. The comments were a sea of congratulations. So happy for you both. You deserve this happiness, Silas. Clara clearly knows a good man when she sees one. That last one felt like a direct, personal attack. They were calling me stupid, implying I'd been too foolish to recognize what I had. When I tried to make subtle, snide remarks to our friends about how rushed it all seemed, I was met with a new kind of resistance. Well, Alara, one of them said, you had plenty of time. My own friends, the ones who had brought me ice cream, began to distance themselves. They told me I needed to move on, to be happy for him. Be happy for him? How could I be happy when this was so profoundly unfair? But the absolute worst part, the final, soul-crushing twist of the knife, was learning that Silas had been promoted to a senior management position at his company, and he and Clara were in escrow on a house. The ambition, the financial stability, everything I had demanded he proved to me, everything I had made him work for, he was now achieving and providing for someone else, someone who had never asked him to prove a single thing. The sickening realization washed over me. While I had been testing his devotion, she had been his partner. While I had been keeping my options open with Julian, she had been building a future with him. While I had been analyzing his every flaw and pushing him to be better, she had accepted him as he was, and he had become better on his own. All my clever strategies, all my reality checks, all my efforts to mold him into my perfect man, had been for nothing. I hadn't made him better. I had held him back. In a final, desperate act of a queen who had lost her throne, I sent him a long message. I poured every ounce of feigned vulnerability and revisionist history into it. I told him I was ready now, that I'd been foolish and scared, but that I realized what I had lost. I told him that what we had was real and deep in a way his new, shiny relationship could never be, that Clara would never understand him the way I did. His response came a day later. It was brief and absolutely crushing. Alara, I'm happy now. Truly happy. I wish you well, and I hope you find what you're looking for. But it won't be with me. I'm not looking backward. It was polite. It was final. And it was clear that I no longer held any power over him whatsoever. I had become irrelevant to his life. So here I am now, sitting in my apartment, scrolling through pictures from their engagement party. I'm consumed by a rage and jealousy, so profound it makes my teeth ache. But I refuse to accept that any of this is my fault. Silas was impatient. He couldn't handle a woman with standards. Clara obviously settled for the first decent guy who came along, which says more about her desperation than his worth. Our friends chose sides based on superficial happiness, instead of understanding the complex, deep dynamics of our relationship. Society pressures women to settle down, and I was just smart enough to resist. Everyone failed me, but I'm the one left living with the consequences. It doesn't matter. I dodged a bullet anyway. If he couldn't wait for me to be 100% ready, then he was never the right person for me in the first place. He simply wasn't man enough to wait. I dodged a bullet. I really did.